Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank you for the generous invitation. I'm really happy to be here and to share with you some of my thoughts. I'm going to deal with the Middle East, of course. It has been a decade after the Arab Spring, and I think that it is high time for us to draw some conclusions. So let's start with this short introduction saying that the downfall of autocratic rulers in Arab states has been accompanied by feelings of euphoria and hopes for a new dawn, imbued with expectations for the establishment of a pluralistic and more open society. When the Arab Spring came to pass, and Middle Eastern commentators and public intellectuals were asked to comment on the news of the day, the analysis and advice that was given to both news outlets and governments was based on the idea that Arab peoples were throwing off the yoke of neo-colonialism and Western involvement in their affairs and at the same time showing that they were pushing towards a new liberal democratic Middle East. Well, the high hopes after the events of the Arab Spring were dashed by the bitter realities of political life. Not only have the past few years shown that democracies were not established, except perhaps the first signs of a pluralistic discourse in Tunisia, which still goes on and brings in sort of a hope for a better future. But except that, strife and civil wars have left the bloody imprint of a humanitarian disaster on the different quarters of the Middle East. Millions of people have been displaced and endanger the stability of other societies and states in the region. Therefore, what needs to be brought in is a deep and analytical reassessment, posing the question, first of all, why were they so wrong? And again, we don't have the solutions to everything, but what we might bring in the first place is those two, I would say, overarching themes when it comes to the Middle East that must be reckoned with, and to a large extent were ignored and not considered by those who came up or thought about the Arab Spring as kind of an opening gate for democracy in the Middle East. Since I am a historian of the Middle East, I do hold the view or the argument that culture matters. Culture matters. One cannot understand the political developments in the Arab world without understanding the inherent differences between political culture in this region and that of the West, or in the West. Still, when those commentators, intellectuals, people of the media, when they came up with their notion, there was a starting degree of universalism, particularly about the implementation of democracy in the Arab world. And one should say that this was to come from both sides of the spectrum, or the political spectrums, from the neo-conservative parties who favored exporting democracy at the point of a gun, and those on the left who believed in the universalism of democracy, without considering the particular aspects of Arab politics and continually minimizing the influence of Islam in political life. In the 20th century Middle East, the state, as it is, was a frame of reference. And many researchers were focusing primarily on the state as the focal point of analysis. What we have to say is that those states of the 20th century, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and others, were basically artificial states that were held together due to repressive measures that were taken by the iron-fisted dictators on top of them. This is exactly what the sociologist, the Arab sociologist Nazi Ayyubi, depicted as fierce states, or in Arabic دولة مخابرات, police states, in which the society is choked by the state's security forces. Now, what tectonic changes that were to be seen in the Middle East in the aftermath of the Arab Spring did, or what they have underscored, is the need for more wide-ranging analytical frameworks. States were to be broken into pieces. Primordial identities from times immemorial were to get a rebirth. The whole socio-cultural map was to be read differently. And this is why what was called into the fore, what was called into question, is what our research table is comprised of. By itself, it created a need for more wide-ranging analytical frameworks, including taking a more introspective and analytical look at the impact of political culture, ethnicity, religion, regional and local identities, etc. Things that the Middle Eastern research of the 20th century was ignoring, because actually it was kind of a set of nation states. It is wrongly put, it should be state nations. There were no nations, there were just artificial states. But the Middle East actually has gone through kind of a tectonic change in the aftermath of the Arab Spring. And this is, by the way, was also kind of a call for a different agenda to be used in order to better understand the changing realities. The story of the collapse of nation states, or state nations that I said, like Iraq and Syria, is very applicable. Their attempt there to create an organic solidarity, to borrow the terms from the teachings of the sociologist Emil Durkheim. Well, these attempts resulted in more of a salad than a melting pot, a situation in which it was easy to distinguish the different distinct parts of the mixture. In short, the fall of autocratic dictators gave new life, as I said before, to sub-state identities or pre-state identities, and that was to be accompanied by the strengthening of sub-state actors, anti-state actors that were to challenge the political order in these countries where cruel and bloodthirsty dictators were toppled or weakened. The hopes of the people were dashed by the renewed opening of the fissures of tribal and religious conflict that were turned into arenas for bloody civil wars. Being on the side right of history, if to paraphrase over President Barack Obama's aphorism, was to lead many intellectuals and government officials to a quick embrace of the Muslim Brotherhood and political Islamists without considering the potential repercussions. Once again, with the exception of Tunisia, where the group called Al-Nahda, the Muslim Brothers there, led by Rashid Arnouchi, came up with something which is of a different tone and flavor. It is safe to assume and to argue that Muslim brotherhoods from Egypt to Turkey, and in Egypt it was the Muslim Brotherhood, in Turkey it was the Justice and Development Party, the AKP, led by Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Well, we should say that all these have been decidedly illiberal in their times in power. The history of their particular polities shaped their own views on government and governance. But while they were at least democratic in outlook, they based their conception on democracy on a concept of majoritarian democracy that was highly illiberal and did not operate according to democratic norms, including allowing for freedom of the courts, opposition, and assembly. Some academics and intellectuals hailed the Turkish model of Prime Minister and now President Recep Tayyip Erdogan as the blueprint for Islamic democracy. Erdogan had famously said during his tenure as the mayor of Istanbul that democracy is like a train. When you reach your destination, you get off. But his economic reforms, his deft marginalization of authoritarian Kemalist elites, especially or specifically in the Turkish military, all these brought him, at the time, considerable praise. In short, the groups that many Westerners perceived to be the liberal opposition, particularly in Egypt and some other Arab states, were nothing of the sort. I think that what we can conclude is that democracy means different things to different peoples or cultures. It is definitely not a monolith. And we should not universalize democracy in order to better understand the dynamics of states and cultures in other parts of the Middle East, particularly of the world, particularly the Middle East. Both the Muslim brotherhoods in Egypt and Turkey and in some other Arab states governed, as I said before, or still governing, according to a majoritarian concept of democracy, believing in majority rule, not in the ideas that have grounded Western democratic thinking, which include the concept of loyal opposition and the safeguarding of the rights of religious and ethnic minorities. I said it once again because basically it is very, very, I would say, unique to see in the Middle East how different groups do translate or interpret the term democracy. To some of them, democracy is basically gleaned from the tradition of the tribe. When the sheikhs were sitting together, creating kind of a local parliament in Arabic majlis. But the divergence between thinking on Middle Eastern concepts of democracy can be maybe best illustrated by a set of polling data from the 2012 PEW survey. In the survey, 2/3 of Egyptians believed that democracy was the system of government that was most preferable. Yet nearly the same amount, 66%, wanted Islam to play an instrumental and significant role in political life. In other words, democracy in its Middle Eastern form is not really a democracy from Western perspective or democracy at all. It is highly influenced by what we said before, majoritarian principles, most importantly by religion, and the expectation and desire that it will play an active role in political life is there, but again, in a different shape. The new oxymoron, in my opinion, of liberal or illiberal democracy, which challenges the view that liberal democracy is the inevitable outcome of economic modernization. This offers a sort of an arrangement that clearly contrasts with the Western understanding of political liberalism and the communicatory democracy it facilitates, and where contemporary political arrangements are legitimized by the values of hierarchy, familialism, clientelism, or alternatively majoritarian rules. I think that this is, on the surface of it, is much more applicable to what's going in the back of mind of many Middle Easterners. Democracy in its westernized form is not universally accepted as the best way to govern. This problem was analyzed by the famous historian Eli Kaduri, the late historian Eli Kaduri, in his 1992 book, Democracy and Political Culture, where he argued there that Arab political culture made the implementation of democracy in the Arab world impossible. Well, I think he took it that far in order to say that there are a basic contradiction between Islam and democracy. I don't think we should use that kind of a dichotomy, but there are definitely some ingredients in this political culture that would make us think of democracy in this region in a much more balanced way. And of course, after having used a totally different new agenda by which actually to measure the dynamics of participatory politics in the Middle East. Many Western academics and commentators believe that the more political Islamists were included in the political game, so to speak, the more moderate they would become. One example was the inclusion moderation hypothesis, a la Robert Michels, which posited that with greater integration into the political processes, political parties will begin to eschew radical platforms and become moderate political actors, both politically and behaviorally. And examples included the SDP and the Christian Democratic parties in Germany and so on, were to or could attest to the arguments of this literature. The belief that these Islamic political parties in the Middle East could serve as liberalizing forces, establish pluralistic democracies, was an idea that was proliferated by puff pieces in major newspapers and by major public intellectuals. Writing in the New York Times, Nicholas Kristof, the newspaper's Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist, while at dinner that was hosted by the Muslim Brothers in New York. He came to argue that the group, the Muslim Brothers, should be described as progressive, especially when it comes to women's rights. And his indication was to put Muslim Brothers on the same scale with the Salafi jihadist, Al-Qaeda, and some other, let us say, extremist groups, by which to argue that in comparison to the Salafi jihadist principles, Muslim Brothers could be definitely regarded or depicted as the moderate Islamic party. Kristof ended his column declaring that what's history in Egypt today is not so much the rise of any one party as the apparent slow emergence of democracy in the heart of the Arab world. Of course, there were many like him. We don't have time to deal with that. People were so quick and hasty to jump to the conclusion that this is basically the end of history in the Middle East. So let me conclude. What will democracy be in the Arab Middle East plus Turkey? Nobody can ignore that the resulting uprisings or the Arab Spring undoubtedly shook the foundations of the Arab states to their core. This is beyond doubt. What cannot be denied too is that in a way it fostered a new opening, allowing the Arab people themselves to become real political actors in their own fate, imagining themselves as political players in a very dynamic political scene. The crowds that were together in the city squares shared the grievances as they demanded popular sovereignty. The grassroots nature of politics, enhanced by the impact of social media, gave a voice to those who had been previously left out of the political arena, and that was to redraw the political map of the Arab world. Having said that, it would be safe to assume that there is no way to get to status quo ante. There's no way back to the pre-Arab Spring fall. Look at what's going on nowadays in the Middle East. It goes on in Iraq, in Lebanon, Tunisia, Sudan, what have you. People have crossed the barriers of fear. The ruler-ruled relationships or the mechanism is being revised in kind of a more gradual and slow Middle Eastern way, but the change is there. But while it is not likely to get back to the status quo ante, and while there are still few options to wait and see actually how the game is being played out, at the same time I would say that the implementation of a Western style liberal democracy is definitely not one of those options. A lot of writings actually were dealing with the possible outcome. People came up with sort of an amalgam after having been so disappointed about the aftermath of the Arab Spring. Sheikhocratia, Badocratia, Dimoktatura. All these were the forms, actually, were raised by many Arab intellectuals and others as to come up with sort of a middle-of-the-road solution. Well, I'm not sure whether we're going to have this or that, but definitely each one of those options could run in tandem or could live under the roof of the populist strand of illiberal democracy. And this is, by the way, that nowadays at least, this is, I would say, the wide interpretation which is being given to the word or the term democracy in the eyes of many in the Middle East, intellectuals, politicians, and others. Now, of course, there are many who would argue the opposite, but I dare say that they are few and far between. Basically, when it comes to the dialogue that we do keep with Arabs day by day, via the website, the virtual world, people are being aware of the other. They have kind of an opportunity to get an idea about the taste or the flavor of the other. They are very curious, I can tell. We do talk to Persians or Iranians, Turks, Kurds, Arabs, day by day. Basically, we have in Tel Aviv University, in the Dayan Center, a squad of young students who are eager to have that. They actually have kind of 21st century skills of the right technology skills. They are basically dealing with the culture itself, because we don't let them deal with Iran unless they know Farsi, unless they are familiar with Iranian history, unless they have a clue about the way people memorize themselves. And the same goes for Kurds, Arabs, Turks. We do not let them universalize the Middle East, especially not as this universalization is basically built up or comprised of Western slogans that should cover the reality A to Z, but this is a very shallowy and artificial analysis. More than anything, the Arab Spring underscored the lack of influence of foreign powers who have sought to imprint their own ideologies and political culture on this region for more than 2 centuries. These dreams of spreading universalist maxims of freedom, democracy, and liberal institutions, while admirable, have been shown to be foolhardy at best. In the end, the goal should be analyzing the Middle East, warts and all, as it is, not as it should be or what we wish it to be. That means appreciating the Middle East for its otherness and seeing the unique factors, particularly the impact of religion and tribal solidarity, for what they are, not as essential caricatures, but as significant components of the socio-political map of the Middle East. Thank you.